A grandmother with 3 grandchildren was turned away by every employer in the county. Every single one. That same afternoon, the owner of the last business that refused her was driving past the parking lot of a dollar store on the east side of Clarkston, Georgia. His window was down. He heard something. Not music, not traffic, not what he expected at all. It was an older woman sitting on a concrete curb in the October heat, with 3 small children arranged around her, like satellites, eating crackers from a sleeve, dividing them with the precision of someone who had been doing the math of not enough for a very long time. The woman he had turned away that morning. What happened next would cost him his pride, challenge everything his father had built, and force him to reckon with a loss he hadn't spoken aloud in 11 years. Nettie Odom was 53 years old, and she was nobody's idea of a charity case. For 6 years, she had raised her daughter's 3 children as her own. Not by court order, not by social services, by necessity, and by love, and by the particular kind of stubbornness that certain women carry in their bones the way other people carry debt. Her daughter Renee had gotten into a car with the wrong man on a Friday night in March, 6 years ago, and hadn't come home. The accident took Renee at 31 and left 3 children standing in Nettie's kitchen the following morning. 7-year-old Kason, 5-year-old Lyric, and 18-month-old Bo, looking at their grandmother with the kind of trust that makes a person's chest hurt. Nettie had been working as a dietary aide at Clarkston Medical Center for 14 years at that point. Steady work. Not exciting, but steady. The kind of job where you showed up, did what was needed, went home, and came back the next day and did it again. She portioned meals. She read diet restrictions off laminated cards. She ran trays down long corridors and smiled at patients who hadn't been smiled at all morning. She was good at it. She was on time every time. In 14 years, she had called in sick exactly 4 times, 3 of which were for Kason's emergency appendectomy when he was 9, and someone had to stay at the hospital. Then the hospital restructured. That was the word they used. Restructured. Which meant they contracted out the dietary department to a private company, which meant Nettie's position was classified, which meant her seniority evaporated, which meant at 53 years old, she was handed a folder of Cobra insurance information and a final check and thanked for her service. She didn't fall apart. She couldn't. Kason was 13 by then, doing his own homework at the kitchen table every night and asking her about his history project with the seriousness of a student who understood, somewhere below the level of words, that his grandmother had given up things he couldn't fully see yet. Lyric was 11, long-legged and particular about her hair, who had started making her own braids in the bathroom mirror using tutorials she found on her phone, which saved Nettie 45 minutes every school morning. Bo was 7. The one who still thought the world was basically fair, because Nettie had worked very hard to make sure he hadn't learned otherwise yet. She spent 9 weeks looking for work. She applied at 4 different hospital systems, 2 nursing facilities, a school cafeteria, a hotel banquet kitchen, and a corporate food service company with locations across 3 counties. She wore her good blouse to every interview. She brought her references typed on paper because she'd learned that not every interviewer wanted to click a link. She was professional. She was prepared. She was 53 years old with a visible gray streak in her hair and reading glasses on a lanyard around her neck. The first rejection came by email. No explanation. The second came the same way. The third was a phone call from a woman who said they'd gone with someone who had more current certifications. The fourth, 5th, and 6th were silences. The kind that stretch out until you stop expecting anything to fill them. The 7th was different. A small private catering company in Clarkston, family-owned, needed a full-time kitchen supervisor. Nettie had called ahead. The man on the phone had sounded pleasant. He asked about her experience. She told him 14 years of dietary management, a ServSafe certification she'd renewed twice, experience coordinating meals for up to 400 patients per day. He said, "Come in Thursday at 10. Sounded like she was exactly what they needed. Nettie dressed carefully that Thursday morning, ironed her blouse the night before, made sure her certification documents were in order in a manila folder. She had taken the 3 children to school herself and stopped to fix Bo's collar at the drop-off line and told Lyric she looked nice and reminded Kaysen to bring his lunch, which he always forgot, even now. Then she drove across town to a small brick building with a hand-painted sign and a gravel parking lot. The man who met her was named Dale Fitch, 50s, work boots, a handshake that meant something. He seemed like the kind of man who had built the business himself over 20 years and had the calluses to prove it. He walked her to a back office, gestured at a chair, sat across from her, glanced at her resume, then looked up. His eyes didn't shift in any obvious way, but something changed behind them, something quiet and fast. He asked her age. She told him. He asked if she was planning to retire soon. She said no. He shuffled the papers, asked if she had any quote-unquote family obligations that might affect her availability. She told him she raised her 3 grandchildren full-time. She watched him write nothing down. He said he appreciated her coming in, said they were considering several strong candidates and would be in touch by end of week. He called the next morning, went another direction, someone with a more current background in event-scale catering. Nettie thanked him for letting her know, hung up, and stood at her kitchen sink for a moment. Outside the window, the yard needed mowing. She'd been meaning to do it for 2 weeks. She looked at the grass for a while. Then she picked up her phone and started searching for the next opening. That afternoon, she picked up the children from the after-school program, which cost her $60 a week, and which she had been paying with the last of her emergency savings. The program's director had mentioned, gently, that they would need payment by the end of the month for the following session or the spots couldn't be held. Nettie had said, of course, she'd figure it out. She didn't figure it out that afternoon. She sat in the parking lot of the dollar store on Ames Road while the children went inside to look around because it cost nothing to look, and she held her phone and did arithmetic that kept coming out wrong. The account balance, the insurance premium, the $68. The electric bill due in 10 days, the number of days until her first unemployment payment if it was approved. She kept adding and kept getting the same answer, which was not enough. The children came back. Bo had a bag of candy he'd bought with $1 he'd had in his pocket for 2 weeks. He offered to split it. Lyric said she was fine. Kaysen said no thank you. Nettie took 1 piece because Bo held it out with both hands like it was something worth offering, and she was not going to say no to that. They sat on the curb outside to eat it because the afternoon was warm and the car needed the AC fixed, and the dollar store parking lot had shade from a big oak tree that leaned over the fence from the property next door. Dale Fitch drove past at 4:17 in the afternoon. He recognized her immediately. Couldn't have said why. Except that you don't forget a woman who looked at you across a desk with that particular expression, the one that isn't anger and isn't sadness, but is the third thing, the one that sits between them, which is dignity under pressure. He slowed down, kept going, got 2 blocks away, stopped at a red light, sat there while the light cycled through green and he didn't move, and the car behind him tapped its horn once, gently, then waited. Dale turned around. He pulled into the lot, parked, walked toward them. He was not sure what he was going to say, so he said the first true thing he could find. "Mrs. Odom, I don't know that this is my business, but are you all right?" Nettie looked at him, the kind of look that takes a measurement. "We're fine," she said, "just getting some air." It was 81 degrees. There was no breeze. Bo had fallen asleep against her arm. She had her reading glasses in her hand because she'd been staring at her phone, trying to read the fine print on an insurance document. Dale stood there. He was a man who had built things with his hands his whole life, and he was not accustomed to not knowing what to do. He looked at the 3 children. Kaysen was watching him the way a teenager watches a stranger who has appeared in an unexpected place, with careful assessment, giving nothing away. Lyric had Bo's shoe in her lap and was tightening the Velcro because it had come loose. He sat down on the curb, not in a chair he'd offered, on the curb, 6 inches from the woman he had turned away that morning. "I made the wrong call today," he said. Nettie didn't answer. Not just the wrong business call, Dale said, the wrong kind of call. She looked at him for a long time. You don't have to do this, Mr. Fitch. No, he said, I know. That's mostly why I stopped. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a business card, turned it over, wrote a number on the back, his cell. Told her to call him tomorrow morning, that the position was still open, that if she wanted it, it was hers. Nettie took the card the way you take something you've been told not to get your hopes up about. Carefully. With both hands. She called him the next morning at 8. What happened in the weeks after that would crack something open in Dale Fitch that he hadn't known was sealed. His wife, Paulette, found out about it the way she found out about most things that happened in the business, later than she should have. Dale mentioned it at dinner, said he'd hired a new kitchen supervisor, said she had 14 years of dietary experience. Paulette asked the usual questions, credentials, availability, whether she'd worked with the scale of events they handled. Dale answered them. Then he mentioned that she raised her grandchildren and had been sitting outside a dollar store when he drove past. Paulette set down her fork. And you hired her because you felt guilty, she said. I hired her because she was qualified, Dale said. I didn't hire her this morning because of something I shouldn't have been calculating in the first place. Paulette picked her fork back up. She didn't say anything else that night. But later, in the kitchen while she was cleaning up, she turned to him and said, Did you give her a fair wage? He told her what he'd offered. Paulette said, Add $2 an hour. She's managing the kitchen, not assisting in it. Dale adjusted the offer the next morning before Nettie signed anything. Nettie started on a Monday. She arrived 15 minutes early. She had the children dropped at school by 7:40 and drove across town and was standing in the parking lot at 7:45 in her chef's coat, which she'd owned for 12 years and kept so well it still looked nearly new. Because that was the kind of woman she was. The kitchen was a controlled kind of chaos. Events catering meant nothing was ever fully predictable. The crew was 4 people besides herself, 3 of whom had been there for years, and 1 of whom was 19 and had started 2 weeks ago, and was still learning what mise en place meant. Nettie learned everyone's name by the end of the first day. By the end of the first week, she had fixed 3 workflow problems that had been slowing down prep, reorganized the dry storage so the items used daily were accessible without moving anything else, and quietly covered a shift gap on Thursday afternoon when one of the crew called out sick by simply not going home until the job was done. Dale watched all of this. He didn't say much. He was not a man who said much, but he noticed on her 5th day, something happened that he thought about for a long time afterward. Nettie was prepping for a Friday evening event, a rehearsal dinner for 200 guests, and she was moving through the kitchen at the particular speed that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing and having no spare motion. Kaysen had called during her lunch break. She'd stepped outside to take it. He'd missed the bus. Could she? She'd said she'd figure it out, hung up, stood in the alley behind the building for a moment, and then walked back inside and asked Dale's assistant if anyone on staff lived near Westview Middle School. She didn't ask Dale. She didn't explain what the problem was. She found her own solution, a woman named Tanya who lived 2 blocks from the school and owed Nettie a favor after Nettie had covered half her prep on Tuesday without being asked. Dale found out about it a week later when Tanya mentioned it offhand. He stood there and absorbed the information. This woman had handled a family emergency at work without slowing production, without asking for anything, and without anyone knowing until the job was done. That evening he left an envelope on the kitchen supervisor's desk. Inside was a gas card for $50, no note. Nettie saw it the next morning. She knew where it came from. She picked it up, carried it to Dale's office, set it on his desk. I don't need this, she said. Dale looked up. I know. Then don't put things on my desk, she said, not unkindly. The way a person sets a boundary that isn't a confrontation, just a fact. He nodded. She left. He sat at his desk for a long time after she closed the door. He thought about his father, who had started the business in 1987 with a single commercial oven and a van and a phone number printed on business cards he handed out at church. His father had a rule. If someone works hard, you pay them more. That's the transaction. That's the whole thing. You don't make it personal. You don't add gestures. You pay people what their work is worth, and you leave the sentiment out of it. Dale had lived by that rule for 22 years of running the company. He thought he understood it. He was starting to wonder if he'd misread it. The evening it cracked open was a Wednesday in November. Dale was working late finishing invoices. Paulette had come by with food because she'd learned a long time ago that left to himself he would forget to eat. She sat across from him in the small office and they ate sandwiches, and she asked him how things were going. He told her about Nettie. Not the overview, the details. The way Kaysen had called, and she'd handled it. The envelope she'd put back. The fact that in 3 weeks she'd never asked him for a single thing. Paulette listened. She reminds me of someone, Dale said. Paulette waited. My mother, he said. And then he stopped, and then he said, my mother raised me alone after my dad left, when I was 8. She worked 2 jobs. She never told me how hard it was. I only found out when I was grown and started doing the arithmetic. Paulette had heard parts of this before, not all of it. Dale didn't talk about his mother often. She had died 11 years ago, a Tuesday afternoon in April, and Dale had been 3 states away at a vendor trade show and hadn't made it back in time. He'd carried that particular weight with no place to put it down. I turned Nettie away, he said, because I was calculating risk, age, obligations, grandchildren. I ran the numbers the way my father taught me to run the numbers. Protect the business. Don't take on complications. He set down his sandwich. But my mother was 53 once. She had a child. She had complications. And somebody gave her the job anyway. The woman who hired her at the school cafeteria in 1979 gave her the job anyway, and everything I built came from that. The office was quiet. The parking lot light came through the blinds in thin stripes. My dad taught me to protect what you've built, Dale said. He was right, but he left before he could teach me the other half. The part about how you build it in the first place. Paulette reached across the desk, put her hand over his. Said nothing. There are moments when nothing is exactly right. Dale came in the next morning and did something he hadn't done in 22 years of owning this company. He sat down across from an employee and asked her what she needed. Not what she needed from him, just what she needed. Nettie looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the dollar store parking lot. The measuring look. Kaysen needs a better school option, she said after a pause. He's smart. He's bored. Bored, smart kids find trouble eventually. I'm trying to get him into the magnet program at Lincoln, but the applications are reviewed faster if there's a reference from someone connected to the school's business partners. She paused again. I'm not asking you to do anything. You asked what I needed. That's what I need. Dale called Lincoln Magnet's administrative office that afternoon. He had catered their faculty events for 9 years. He made 1 phone call, left 1 message. He did not tell Nettie. She found out 3 weeks later when the school called about Kaysen's application. She came to Dale's office after close. She stood in the doorway. You called Lincoln, she said. I catered their gala for 9 years, he said. I know the director. Mr. Fitch, Nettie. She looked at him. Why? He thought about it, he answered honestly. Because I've been running my father's half of a lesson my whole life, and I didn't know there was another half until you put that envelope back on my desk. She stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then she said, my grandson is going to get in on his own merits. You know that. I know, Dale said. I just cleared the line of sight. Kaysen's application was accepted in January. Lyric came to the Fitch catering kitchen for the first time on a Saturday in February. Nettie had asked Paulette, not Dale, whether it would be acceptable to bring the children in for a few hours when the school was closed for professional development, and the after-school program wasn't running. Paulette had said of course, and had come in herself that morning and set up a small table in the corner of the prep area, with colored pencils, and a sketch pad she'd bought the night before because she'd heard from Nettie that Lyric liked to draw. Lyric did not use the sketchpad immediately. She sat at the table and watched her grandmother work. She watched with the kind of focused attention children bring to things they've decided matter. She watched Nettie move through the kitchen with authority, giving direction, adjusting temperatures, tasting things, conferring with Tanya about timing. She watched a woman who, at 53, with gray in her hair and reading glasses on a lanyard, commanded that kitchen the way a conductor commands an orchestra. Every movement purposeful, every decision visible. At one point, Lyric took out the sketchpad and drew something. Later, when they were packing up to leave, she showed it to Paulette. It was Nettie at the counter in her chef's coat from behind. You could tell it was her from the posture alone. Straight back, shoulders level, head slightly tilted toward whatever she was making. Paulette held that drawing for a long moment. Then she asked if she could keep it. Lyric said yes, but you have to frame it. Paulette bought a frame on the way home, hung it in the office above the desk. Dale saw it on Monday morning and didn't say anything, but he looked at it for a long time before he sat down. Bo met Dale for the first time in March when Nettie brought all three to a Saturday community event the company was catering in Decatur. The kids were told to stay out of the way, and they largely did. Kaysen had brought a book. Lyric had her phone. Bo had lasted approximately 11 minutes before finding his way to the loading dock where Dale was directing supply intake and standing at a respectful distance, watching with the expression of a boy who has decided this is the most interesting thing he's seen all week. Dale looked at him. "Yes, sir," Bo said, from the exact spot where he'd been standing. Dale considered this. "You can stand closer if you want. Just don't touch anything on the truck." Bo moved 3 feet forward. "What's in those big silver boxes?" "Chafers," Dale said. "They keep food warm." "How?" "Sterno. Little can of fuel underneath." Bo thought about this. "Like a campfire for food." Dale looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what it is." They stood there together for a while, watching the supply intake, not saying much. The way two people stand together when they've decided they don't mind the other one being there. Nettie saw it from across the courtyard. She didn't say anything. She just watched her grandson stand next to the man who had almost been another door closed in her face, and noted, with the careful quietness of someone who has learned not to count things too soon, that it looked like something she hadn't had a name for yet. Spring came slowly to Clarkston. March was cold. April was better. May arrived with heat that reminded everyone summer was a few weeks away from being unavoidable. Paulette started something she called the Saturday table. It wasn't announced. It wasn't a program. It was just that on Saturdays, after the morning prep was done and before the afternoon event load began, Paulette would put food out on the long table in the back room, and whoever was around would eat together. Staff mostly. Sometimes a vendor who was running deliveries. Once, a florist who had lost her ride home and was waiting for her daughter. The children came on the Saturdays Nettie worked, which was most of them. Kaysen ate and read. Lyric ate and talked to Tanya, who was 29 and had opinions about everything, and who Lyric had decided was the most sophisticated person she'd ever met. Bo ate and told stories. Bo was a talker. He had been since he was 4 and had simply never stopped. He told stories about school, about his friend Marcus, about a bird that had been living in the drain pipe outside their window, about a YouTube video he'd seen about volcanoes. Nobody asked for the stories. Nobody minded them. One Saturday in May, Bo was telling a story about a spelling bee he'd won at school, and he said something that stopped the table. He said, "I told my teacher my grandma helped me practice, and she said I should thank whoever's taking care of me. And I said my grandma is my grandma. She's not taking care of me. She's my family." Nobody responded immediately. Bo went back to his food, unconcerned. The table continued. But Dale, sitting at the end with his coffee, set his cup down and didn't pick it up again for a while. He thought about his own grandmother, a woman named Oreen who had died when he was 24, who had been the loudest presence in any room she entered and the first person to tell him he was capable of more than he thought, and the only person who had attended every single event, every Sissy game, anything, for his entire childhood, without exception. He had never thought about what she gave up to do that. Had never occurred to him to do the arithmetic. He sat at the Saturday table in the back of his catering kitchen and thought about Dale Fitch and about Nettie Odom and about all the women who carry the structure of other people's lives inside their own without anyone doing the counting. In June, Nettie got an offer from another company. A larger operation, commercial scale, based in Atlanta proper, more money. Better benefits. A longer commute. She told Dale on a Friday. Professionally. Brought the offer letter. Laid it on his desk. Said she wanted to be straightforward with him before she made any decisions. Dale looked at the offer letter. Looked at the number. Sat back. Is the commute workable? He asked. Marginally, she said. The kids' schools are here in Clarkston. I know where the schools are, she said. He nodded. Looked at the letter again. What do you want? She was quiet for a moment. The question surprised her. Not many people ask it directly. I want the children to be stable, she said. I want Kaysen at Lincoln without worrying every month whether I can keep the lights on. I want Lyric to have what she needs for high school. I want Bo to stay in the school district where he has friends. She paused. I want to do work that matters. I want to be paid what it's worth, Dale said. Give me the weekend. He matched the salary. He added a family benefits package. Paulette had been telling him to add for 3 years. He opened a second paid position in the kitchen, so Nettie was managing a proper team rather than filling in the gaps herself. And he offered her something he had never offered any employee in 22 years. 10 days of paid leave per year, no questions asked, because some things come up that aren't sick days and aren't vacation and don't fit into any category except life. Nettie read the revised offer on Monday morning, read it again, folded it, placed it in her folder. Thank you, she said. You were right to put that envelope back, Dale said. She looked at him. You were right, he repeated. I was making it personal when it should have been straightforward. You do good work. This is what good work is worth. That's the whole transaction. Nettie said. Your father teach you that? Half of it, Dale said. The other half I learned slower. She accepted the offer that afternoon. Kaysen Odom started at Lincoln Magnet School in August. He wore new shoes, the ones Nettie had bought on sale in July, and kept in the box until the first day because he'd looked at them twice since she brought them home, which was his way of being excited without admitting it. His teacher asked him the standard first-day question about where he lived. He said Clarkston, and then he thought about it and said, actually, Lincoln District now. The way he said it had a kind of claim in it, a word he'd been waiting to have the right to use. Lyric started high school the same week. She was precise about her schedule, color-coded and laminated. She was going to be fine, and she knew it, and she required no reassurance, only the printer ink to make the laminated schedule, which Paulette had bought her in July because she'd happened to mention it at the Saturday table, and Paulette had written it on her hand and not forgotten. Bo went back to 3rd grade and came home every day with something to tell and told it at length and with detail, and everyone in the house listened because Bo had figured out, before most adults do, that the world is full of things worth noticing, and the only question is whether you're paying attention. On the first Saturday in October, Paulette put out a bigger spread at the table than usual. No explanation. When everyone sat down, Dale said a few words, which was unlike him and which therefore made everyone pay attention. He thanked his staff. He said the company had its best 3rd quarter since 2018. He said there was a bonus going out in this week's pay, distributed evenly among all staff, including the part-timer who'd only been there since August. Then he said something he had not planned to say. He said, I almost didn't hire the person who made the most difference this year. I let myself calculate things that weren't mine to calculate. I want to say that in front of everybody, because it ought to be said in front of everybody. He looked at Nettie. She looked back at him with that same level gaze she had brought to his office, to his parking lot, to every room she'd walked into since April. I'm glad you turned around, she said. Not thank you for hiring me. Not I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad you turned around. Because that was the thing. The moment the whole story pivoted on. Not the hiring, the turning around. The table was quiet for a moment. Then Bo said, "What are we celebrating?" Because he had been very patient but felt the moment called for clarification. Tanya said, "All of us, baby." Bo accepted this and went back to his food. Later that afternoon, after the event load had gone out and the kitchen had been cleaned and the staff had gone home, Dale stood in the empty prep area for a few minutes by himself. The kitchen smelled like it always did at end of day, the warm residue of 100 small tasks done well. He had stood in kitchens since he was 12 years old helping his father, and he had never once thought of this smell as anything in particular. It was just the end of the day. It smelled different now. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the same, and he was the one who had changed. Maybe that's how it usually goes. The world stays still, and something in you shifts just enough to let the light in at a different angle. And what you thought you were seeing clearly, you see again for the first time. He turned off the lights, locked the door, drove home. On his refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a peach, was a copy of the drawing Lyric had made. Paulette had printed it from her phone the previous week without telling him and put it there one morning while he was in the shower. He'd been walking past it every day since. He stopped and looked at it this time. A woman at a prep counter, from behind, in a chef's coat. Posture you could set a ruler against, head tilted just slightly, toward the work. Not away from it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went to find his wife. The businesses that had turned Nettie away didn't close. The world doesn't usually work that tidily. Most of them kept running, kept hiring people who looked less complicated on paper, kept missing things they couldn't see because they'd decided not to look. That's how it goes sometimes, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. But in one small catering kitchen in Clarkston, Georgia, a man had turned his car around in a parking lot when he didn't have to. And a woman had put an envelope back on a desk when she could have kept it. And a boy had learned the word family isn't about who took you in. It's about who you mean when you say we. Nettie Odom was 53 years old when every door closed. 53 when one man drove 2 blocks and turned around. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was sitting on a curb doing the arithmetic of not enough and figuring out the next step. She had been figuring out the next step for 6 years, since that March night when everything rearranged itself without asking her permission. She didn't need a miracle. She needed one person to look past what they'd calculated and see what was actually there. Some people build walls around what they've made because someone taught them walls are how you keep it. And they're not wrong, exactly. But a wall that keeps out everyone who looks complicated is also a wall that keeps out everyone who turns out to matter most. The toolbox in that case was a job offer revised on a weekend. The dandelion was a drawing in a plastic frame. The crack in the ice was a man sitting down on a curb instead of standing above it. It didn't take much. It never does. It just takes someone willing to feel the inconvenience of someone else's reality long enough to decide it's also theirs.